welcome to Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. In today's show, I have something a little bit different. The phone lines in the Washington Times are down. In the studio, the phone lines are down. All around, the phone lines are down. So that means it's very difficult for me to have my scheduled guest phone in for the interview. So what I am doing today is tailing off my Tuesday show about socialism in America. I am going to give a chapter of my recently published Socialists Don't Sleep, Christians Must Rise, or America Will Fall, to you, the listener. I am going to read one of my chapters that I think, in my own research of this book, was most alarming, and that is the infiltration of the Democratic Socialists of America, or Democrat Socialists of America, that is, the DSA, into America's public school system. The outright infiltration of card-carrying socialists into the public school systems. No, it's not your imagination. Yes, there really are socialists seeking to train your children to hate America, to hate capitalism, to hate the idea of God-given freedoms, and instead to go forth after graduation and carry out the Marxist, collectivist, globalist way of politicking. It's not tinfoil hat conspiracy. This is really happening. So, without further ado, here is my chapter in Socialists Don't Sleep about the education system and the absolute peril America is facing. Here we go. Settle in for a dangerous ride. Chapter 4. Believing public schools are good for children. Wisconsin, year 2011, was in turmoil. Republican Governor Scott Walker and Republicans in the legislature, facing what was estimated as a 2-year, $3.6 billion budget shortfall, proposed a bill that would cut public employees' benefits, including those for teachers and local governments, as well as curb some collective bargaining rights and the accompanying means of paying for that service, the compulsory members' dues. Unions fast-forwarded into frenzy. We're at a point of crisis, Walker said, explaining the financial tightening was necessary to save 6,000 or so jobs. The unions didn't care. Tens of thousands of union-represented public employees rallied in the streets of Madison, while thousands more stormed the state capitol, noisily took up spots, and refused to leave. The State House filled with as many as 10,000 demonstrators who chanted, sang the national anthem, and beat drums for hours, one Associated Press story read. The noise level in the rotunda rose to the level of a chainsaw, and many Madison teachers joined the protest by calling in sick in such numbers that the district had to cancel classes. Actually, about 40% of teachers in the area called in sick, leaving students, leaving the children, the very ones the liberals always say they seek to protect, along with their working parents, in limbo. It's not as if the proposed cuts were outrageous. Indeed, public workers were only being asked to pay more into their pensions and at least 12.6% of their health care plans. Given that private sector employees rarely even have pensions these days, between 1975 and the mid-2000s, the numbers of workers with pensions in the private force dropped from 88% to 33%. And given that private sector employees also regularly pay for 50% or more of their work-based health care plans, Wisconsin's Republicans weren't asking a lot of their tax-paid force. It was simply time to pay the piper for years of irresponsible fiscal living, two of which, 2009 and 2010, came with Democrats in complete charge in the House, Senate, and governor's mansion. Walker and Republicans hadn't created the mess. They were trying to clean it up. Besides, it's not as if teachers in Wisconsin were exactly poverty-stricken. In the 2009-2010 fiscal year, public schools teachers in the state earned, on average, $49,816 for a salary and another $25,325 in benefits. At $75,141, that's not too shabby, especially in a state that falls consistently on the lower end of national cost of living comparisons in the areas of housing, transportation, and groceries. Again, the unions didn't care. To union leadership, it wasn't just the extra pension and health costs that irked. It was the reality of losing their unfettered rights to bargain, meaning their unfettered powers to hog-tie politicians and taxpayers and bend them to their financial will, that most galled. Collective bargaining, contrary to what the name suggests, is actually about as far from the table of equitable bargaining as can be. More truthfully, collective bargaining is the union's way of forcing employers to make concessions, or else. It's not so much bargaining as it is extortion. And in a country like America, where markets are supposedly free and where citizens in the workforce can pick and choose and come and go as they please, the system of collective bargaining, like affirmative action, should have been killed long ago. Well, Wisconsin's 175,000 or so public sector employees, circa 2011, obviously disagreed. Teachers and their union representatives banded together with other public sector employees in disgusting shows of mob-style protests on the floors of the Capitol, at the offices of the governor, outside the state buildings, and elsewhere, where they waved signs, demanded Walker's recall, chanted slogans, blocked doorways, and generally disrupted business. Taxpayer-funded business, to be exact. They slept on the floors of the Capitol building despite laws prohibiting such action. Police were called to the scene to control crowds and, when and where possible, quiet outbursts. Meanwhile, Democratic representatives made themselves scarce. More than 24 Democratic Assembly members, friends of the Union all, simply skipped town and took up lodging in hotels just outside the state's borders. Why? To deny the Republicans the necessary quorum to vote on the budget bill. Cowards, crybabies. To Democrats, money is magic. I'm just trying to balance my budget, Walker said in an interview with the New York Times. To those who say, why didn't I negotiate on this? I don't have anything to negotiate with. We don't have anything to give. Teachers apparently didn't want to hear that reality. Neither did the fleeing Democrats. Still, sanity prevailed. The Republican adults in the room stayed tough and steered straight. On March 10th, after weeks of contentious hearings, the state assembly passed the budget bill 53-42 with all its curbs on costs, with all its curtailment of union powers. A day later, Walker signed Wisconsin Act 10 into law. It was a big win for Republicans, one that reverberated across the nation. Truthfully, it was also a big win for taxpayers who had been forced to provide funds so politicians could live above budget means for years. Yet all the Democrats saw was red. To this day, leftists, not just in Wisconsin but elsewhere, continue to fight for union control of the public education system. Welcome to America's schools. Welcome to the madness of today's public schools. The system is not so much about teaching our children to read, write, and compute, as it is now a battleground for money, power, control, leftist indoctrination, and yes, outright socialist infiltration. And if you think this is hyperbole, think again. On February 22nd, 2018, teachers in West Virginia kicked off a massive strike that impacted an estimated 277,000 students. The strike was called because union leaders said Republican Governor Jim Justice's budgeted 4% raises for teachers over 3 years didn't go far enough. So thousands of teachers across the state's 55 counties simply walked out of class and headed to the state capitol to protest in the streets and at the political offices of Charleston, leaving hundreds of schools emptied and closed in the process. The building stayed that way until March 7th, when teachers ultimately won 5% raises and returned to their classrooms. Actually, the unions won their 5% pay raise concessions from the governor just a few days into the strike on February 27th, and he signed the deal a few days after that on Tuesday, March 6th. But teachers didn't want to return right away to school. Schools are called off on Wednesday, March 7th, for a cooling-off period and will resume on Thursday, March 8th, the West Virginia Education Association posted on its Facebook page. How nice for them. But for the taxpayers and parents who either had to take off work to stay with their children or pay higher daycare costs to occupy them during normal school hours? Cha-ching! What a face slap. After more than a week of striking, teachers were in essence treated to a paid emotional holiday. That's not even the worst of it. Much as the left-leaners in the media would have it believed, this whole multi-day walkout was not a groundswell moment of concerned teachers decrying a truly desperate situation. Yes, striking teachers were indeed paid below the national average. But the convenient failure of omission was this. West Virginia's cost of living, in comparison to other states, was and is below average too. Teachers making the average $45,642 in West Virginia may have wanted to be paid the average $84,227 of a New York educator, according to 2017-2018 National Education Association figures. But that wouldn't really be fair to New Yorkers or to taxpayers in West Virginia. In one estimate, West Virginia's cost of living was figured nearly 22 percentage points below the national average, with a median home cost of $96,400 compared to the $231,200 for the United States. In another, from the West Virginia Department of Commerce, the state's cost of living was rated 5.6% lower than the average for the country. Yet one more claimed the cost of living for West Virginia was 12% lower than the national average. The discrepancies are due to different factors used to figure the list, as well as the different times of figuring, but the conclusion's the same. Local experts, despite rising costs of living, West Virginia remains among one of the most affordable states to live, WestVirginiaNews.com reported in August 2018. So why should teachers in West Virginia expect or demand to make salaries that would put them on par with educators living in more expensive states? The answer is they shouldn't. But just as in Wisconsin, teachers in West Virginia didn't care about the financial facts. They wanted their money, and they wanted it now. So they abandoned their classrooms, took to the streets, and this is the real hair raiser. Their protests weren't just carefully orchestrated and strategically planned. They were completely socialist driven. They were specifically crafted by socialists working within the school system. They were specifically designed by socialists who purposely tried to put those evil corporations in the crosshairs so as to gain the most public support for their protest buck. From the website of the Democratic Socialists of America, an excerpt of a post penned by DSA teachers of West Virginia explaining the genesis of the strike movement in that state. It reads, a few DSA members that were teachers in West Virginia public schools began having conversations about new austerity measures facing public employees. Our wages had been stagnant for years. Unlike our healthcare costs, which were climbing. We formed a reading group, held brainstorming sessions, and quickly agreed that winning our demands would require militant action. Militant action? Teachers as DSA members? This is not the rhetoric of kindly elementary-level instructors. These are not the people to be trusted with American children. DSA wrote, our immediate win in West Virginia was a 5% raise for all public sector workers. But crucially, our movement's demand was that the money come from highly profitable corporations that have long exploited West Virginia's natural wealth. Socialist teachers called to raise taxes on the corporations and extractive fossil fuel industries that exploit our people. Workers began showing up to the Capitol holding signs like tax our gas and make a choice, tax cuts for big business or health care for West Virginia workers. The revenue battle is ongoing, but our popular campaign against corporate interests will make it harder for the ruling class to drive a wedge between public employees and other working-class West Virginians. Big business bad, big corporations badder, sacrificial teachers, always looking out for the children good. Right? It's a lie. Be not deceived. Socialists will use distraction and deception to create the kind of chaos that wins them influence, power, and control. Look at this admission also on the DSA website in the section describing why socialists should consider entering the field of education. Despite attacks on schools and teachers' unions in the recent past, teaching is still one of the most stable professions in the United States. In most states, teaching pays a living wage with benefits, including health insurance. Even in West Virginia, where teachers experienced some of the lowest pay in the nation, they were sometimes the highest paid workers in their communities. That's a heck of an admission, given the troubles the strikers generated. Yet, this is what socialists do. They foster a narrative of victimhood at the hands of anyone with money, and they do it to lay the groundwork for the government to come in and strip those with money of their money and redistribute it elsewhere. That's the narrative of Senator Elizabeth Warren from the 2020 presidential campaign trail. That's the narrative of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez near daily in the House. And apparently that's the narrative coming from public school teachers in a state, West Virginia, that voted the Republican for president between 2000 and 2016 and that polled in 2017 overwhelmingly in support of President Donald Trump. In fact, as Gallup reported, at the state level, support for Trump throughout the United States in 2017 ranged from a high of 61% in West Virginia to a low of 26% in Vermont. But socialists don't sleep. They're coming for your children. They're not stopping until they achieve their goals, the complete takeover of America's public schools. Their own words give testimony to that fact. From the DSA website once again. The West Virginia strike didn't happen by chance. It was the result of creative shop floor organizing by teachers with socialist politics. These teachers introduced a fundamentally different vision of their state than what was on offer from either elected officials or union leaders. And they were able to do this because they had organic connections to their coworkers. Rather than shouting socialist messaging at workers from afar, these teachers were able to alter the direction of the movement from within. If DSA members become active in workplace organizing for the long term, we can wage fights similar to West Virginia. Socialists should take jobs as teachers and other school-based workers for the political, economic, and social potential the industry holds. If this is horrifying, it should be. These are America's schools we're talking about, after all. Education is a key target for socialists because, one, it's a system that's already highly unionized, meaning the masses are easier to shepherd. Two, education isn't going anywhere, meaning it's not a business that will just pick up and move to an area less friendly to unions. Three, the system is ingrained in communities nationwide, meaning students and families regularly interact with teachers and compassion for cause is therefore more easily gained. And four, teaching is a relatively stable job, meaning the socialists within the system will be better able to root their messages and spread their influence because the workforce won't be in constant turnover. Their ultimate endgame is not better education for the children. Their ultimate endgame is agitation with the purpose of gaining greater, even greater power. The schools, your children, are just tools to achieve this goal. In the words of DSA, the rank and file strategy is not only concerned with recruiting our coworkers to socialist organizations. The aim of the rank and file strategy is to build organizations of working class people that challenge the power of capital. Organizers on the shop floor, the schools, for instance, with a socialist political vision can help build struggles that draw in large numbers of workers and raise the class consciousness of many. It is out of these struggles that new socialists will arise. They're taking the lessons learned from the failures of Wisconsin and their successes of West Virginia and applying them to their plans for the future. They're learning from their mistakes how to better implement socialism in the schools. The strike in West Virginia didn't end in West Virginia. Shortly after that campaign was settled, teachers in Oklahoma, in Arizona, and other parts of the nation kicked off their own protests for pay. And taking a memo from the West Virginia strikers' playbook, they pointed to the higher teacher salaries in other states as cause for their calls, while outright ignoring cost of living comparisons. In 2019, it was more of the same. Teachers in Los Angeles went on strike in January 2019. Weeks later, teachers in Denver walked out of classes. Shortly after that, teachers in Oakland, California, organized to follow suit. In February 2019, meanwhile, teachers in West Virginia, for the second time in about a year, simply walked off their jobs and closed schools. This time, their protests weren't for pay, but rather against the Republican-led legislative effort to privatize education. Privatizing education obviously strips the unions, strips the socialists of their primary source of bargaining, the children. "Kill that bill," chanted thousands of striking teachers who crowded the state capitol in opposition to legislation that would have opened the first charter schools in the state. A brief video posted on Twitter from one of the protest participants showed the ugliness of the scene. "We aren't using our indoor voices," the Twitter poster wrote, above a video of a noisy congregation of protesters as they screamed within the hallways of the Capitol and waved signs with messages like, "The power of the people is stronger than the people in power." And that was a post from a woman who self-identified on Twitter as committed to Christ and his call, wife, mother, pastor, English teacher, activist. What about the children? What about the supposed top priority of teachers to educate the youth? If nothing else, get this message. It's not about the children. It's about weaponizing the schools to gain socialist strongholds across the nation. If nothing else, realize this. These are not the schools of America's yesteryear. They're not even the schools from America's yesterday. These are political breeding grounds of anti-American activism. From the website of Socialist Alternative, a group that seeks to spread socialism throughout the country, comes this. The 2018 West Virginia teachers' strike now serves as an important instance of rediscovering the strike weapon and shows what could have been achieved in Wisconsin. Schools were shut down in all 55 counties in an illegal strike. In very different ways, the Wisconsin defeat and the West Virginia victory created ripples across the country. While the defeat in Wisconsin emboldened other right-wing politicians to launch further attacks on workers, the ripple effect of West Virginia was to inspire teachers across the country, spreading to Kentucky, Oklahoma, Arizona, and North Carolina. This shows the importance of struggles being won. Working-class people and socialists don't struggle against the capitalist class just to prove a point, but to win real gains. Victories increase working people's confidence to fight for more. These struggles are laying the groundwork for a new, more militant leadership in the unions. The lengthy quotes from the socialist websites are important. It's important to see, in their own words, socialist plans for America's public schools. Otherwise, it's hard to believe. It's tough to see those kindly teachers who send home report cards with specially prepared notes about your child's progress in marching militant formation. That's not to say all teachers in the public schools are socialists. By no means are they all socialists. Some, in fact, are wonderful people with hearts set on teaching children the basics and seeing today's youth blossom into tomorrow's patriotic, purposeful American leaders. But as a group, as a unionized organization, far too many teachers and administrators have set aside the core values that were supposed to have guided them into the field of education in the first place, actual teaching, and instead thrown in with the socialist mindset of victimhood and entitlement. Far too many have joined the socialist movement spreading through America's public schools and picked up protest signs and marched on legislators, making unreasonable demands year after year that burden taxpayers and parents alike. Sadly, the good teachers soon enough catch on and get sifted. They either suffer in silence, patiently awaiting retirement, or quit for more fruitful pastures. Either way, along the way, they're treated to the socialist special, attack and intimidate. Teacher unions still have a stronghold on our education. wrote Rebecca Friedrichs, a California public school teacher who came under union fire for bucking the system from within and calling for more freedom in education. She later wrote a book about her experiences standing up to Goliath, battling state and national teachers' unions for the heart and soul of our kids and country. In a Fox News opinion piece in December 2019, she insisted that while the Supreme Court had, in its Janus versus AF-CME decision, overturned the 40-year state practice of forcing public workers to pay union dues, the nation's public school systems were still in peril. Unions have harshly bullied great teachers into silence for decades and are chasing many of the greatest teachers right out of the classroom, Friedrichs wrote. It's a movement, all right. Inspired by West Virginia, teachers spread red for Ed movement across Arizona, read one Labor Notes headline in March of 2018. What's Red for Ed? Red for Ed is a campaign that was started, at least in part, by a 24-year-old music teacher from Arizona named Noah Carvelis as a means of getting fair pay for teachers, of getting the schools properly funded, and so forth and so on. The campaign began locally but spread nationally. Photos of numerous teachers' strikes held in recent months underscore Red for Ed's rapid-fire emergence as the go-to campaign for protesting teachers. How so? Most participants can be seen wearing the signature red shirts of the movement. How fitting red is, after all, the color of choice for socialists, Marxists, communists, and leftists, and the dirty secret of Carvelis, who otherwise appears a sensibly speaking, clean-cut, young education advocate, is that he's a socialist. Maria Mazzeo Sims, who served as an Arizona legislator between 2017 and 2019, tried to point this out in the early portion of 2018, but was promptly attacked. From the Arizona Daily Independent. When Representative Maria Sims boldly stated that the Red for Ed movement organizers were socialists, she was jeered. When the leader of Red for Ed, Noah Carvelis, spoke at the Socialism 2018 event in Chicago this month, he was cheered. Carvelis scrubbed his social media presence and denied that he was leading a radical movement at the time. He and his supporters, including many in the mainstream media, went on the offense and took umbrage with Sims' simple observation. The media was largely complicit, and they got played. In either case, Carvelis' appearance at the Socialism 2018 conference in Chicago from July 5th through 8th indicates that he and his fellow militants no longer care to hide their agenda, and it exposed the degree to which the media again failed to report on simple truths that would have profoundly altered the coverage of a major event, the Red for Ed strike and rallies. Or would it have? Given today's leftist leanings of so many in the media, maybe the socialist roots of the very teachers' strikes taking place around the nation in the 2018-2019 timeframe wouldn't have resulted in altered coverage, wouldn't have resulted in watchdog warning pieces about the true nature of Red for Ed. Red for Ed supporters took to social media by the thousands to post pictures of smiling teachers in red shirts at protest sites. They filled scores of internet blog space with appeals for the public to support their teachers, alongside hashtags or icons of Red for Ed. They paired their Red for Ed referenced posts with happy stories about student learning, all as a means of inextricably linking the socialist tag with public schools in a way that doesn't scream socialist. That way, those who called out Red for Ed as the socialist movement it was and is could easily be dismissed as conspiratorial, crazy, delusional. That way, Red for Ed opponents could easily be silenced. And that way, Red for Ed organizers could grow their socialist movement further, domestically and globally. Wear red to support public ed. Red one Facebook page with more than 48,000 followers that described itself as a grassroots movement started by parents and teachers as a way to stand up for public education in America. Other Facebook pages wear red for public ed. Red for Ed, Educators Solidarity Network. Red for Ed, advocated similarly. This is the first time in over 20 years that all four education unions tweeted elementary educators, a Canadian outfit, in January 2020, have moved into a legal strike position. We are united and proudly Red for Ed. The National Education Association, on its NEA Today website, dedicates a whole section to calling for Red for Ed supporters to unionize and recruit. We're joining together to demand the public schools our students deserve, NEA wrote. We are Red for Ed. But slapping a snappy slogan atop a purely socialist endeavor does not change the socialist nature of the endeavor. Neither does throwing in some photos of smiling children. Our nation's public schools aren't just in trouble. They've become utterly corrupted by anti-American forces who are wickedly using the most vulnerable and most innocent, the children, to stage an internal takeover of the country's government, culture, and societal foundations. They've become no place for the children. Yank them out now, homeschool them, put them in private and charter schools, enroll them in places of learning affiliated with the church, or suffer the coming generation's onslaughts on all that patriotic Americans hold dear. When possible, where possible, run hardcore conservative candidates with traditional views of family, culture, and politics for school board positions so as to fight back formally against the far leftists who want to shove far leftist agendas as deep into the education system as they can. Petition the locals and states to open more charter schools and open doors wider for educational choice for children. And every time a teachers' union brings forth a demand for higher pay, make sure the political powers that be have at their disposal a cost of living comparison report that shines light on the truths of teachers' salaries. And finally, remember this. Just because your child's teacher is nice doesn't mean your child's teacher isn't socialist. Socialists smile too, especially if they think it will help their cause. Drum roll, please. Ba-dum. That is Chapter 4 of Socialists Don't Sleep, Christians Must Rise, or America Will Fall. If you want to learn more about this issue, I suggest you attend a school board meeting in your local community. And if you want to learn more about socialism in America, please pick up a copy of my book, Socialists Don't Sleep, Christians Must Rise, or America Will Fall. It's a bestseller on Amazon. It's been a bestseller for some time. Check it out. Get your copy. And you know what? Get in the fight. Because I know you don't want socialism in America. I have to believe you don't want socialism in America. Otherwise, what's the point, right? We need to keep America free for our children and for our children's children. This is the nation God blessed us with. It's our job to fight to keep it any way we can. God-given freedoms, that's what it's about. Thanks for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.